The projector hummed in the silence. My actual slide deck, flickered across the boardroom wall as Gareth Vance, VP of Operations, paced in front of 50 executives like he owned the place. Because apparently he did. He was using my words, my pitch, even the exact phrasing I'd spent 3 months perfecting. If we can close this funding round, we'll triple our clean energy output within 18 months. Applause erupted. My hands went numb. I opened my mouth to speak, the word actually forming on my lips, but he cut me off with a casual wave. We'll let the team cover technicalities later. The CEO laughed, cameras flashed, people stood shaking hands. The meeting adjourned like a curtain falling. Gareth walked past me, stopped, and leaned close enough that only I could hear. "Don't look so shocked, Ryan, that's how this game works." Then he shook my hand for the cameras and walked away. I stood there frozen, watching my vision turn him into a hero. And that's when I realized he'd planned this from the beginning. My name is Ryan Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and until that boardroom moment, I'd spent 3 years as senior project manager at Holter Energy. I wasn't flashy, I didn't play politics, I just worked late nights, weekends, holidays. I built the renewable grid expansion plan that Gareth just claimed as his own masterpiece. It was supposed to be my shot at making partner. The proposal that would finally make people see me as more than just reliable. I'd been loyal, invisible, and honestly tired, but I believed in the work. I believed if I did things right, success would follow. I was wrong. Because the truth is, in corporate America, being good at your job isn't enough. Being visible matters more. And Gareth, he was a master at being seen. He had the charm, the connections, the CEO's ear. What he didn't have was vision. So he took mine, and until that morning I'd been too blind to see it coming. The hallway felt cold after everyone left. Gareth's assistant passed me without making eye contact, clutching a stack of folders like they were classified documents. My phone buzzed. An email notification lit up the screen. "Great job supporting Gareth's vision today." Supporting. The word sat in my chest like a stone. I walked to my office in a daze, shut the door, and stared at the framed proposal draft hanging on my wall, my signature printed clearly at the bottom. The same document Gareth had submitted to the executive board with his name in bold at the top. I'd noticed it weeks ago but convinced myself it was a clerical error. Maybe someone in admin made a mistake. Maybe it would get corrected. Now I understood. There was no mistake. He'd taken my work, erased my name, and built his empire on my foundation. And everyone just watched it happen. Some probably knew, but nobody said a word. I couldn't stop replaying the boardroom scene. The way he'd positioned himself at the front. The confidence in his voice when he described models I'd built from scratch. The casual "I'll handle." This one Ryan text he'd sent that morning telling me to arrive 15 minutes late. I thought he was being considerate, giving me time to grab coffee before the big presentation. Now I saw it clearly. He wanted me there, but not early enough to object, not vocal enough to contradict him, just present enough to look like part of his team. It wasn't carelessness, it wasn't ambition, it was execution, cold, calculated, and flawless. He'd stolen my work the way a magician steals attention, by making everyone look somewhere else, and I'd been the fool who helped him do it. That realization burned worse than the theft itself. I went to HR the next morning, still shaking with adrenaline. The woman behind the desk listened with a polite, practiced smile. "He presented my work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The entire expansion plan. It had my name on every draft until last week." She nodded slowly, fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Ryan, Garrett's a VP. These things happen in collaborative environments. You're part of the team, right?" Her tone was dismissive, final, like I just complained about someone taking my parking spot. I sat there, staring at her name plaque, Patricia Holly's Employee Relations Specialist. She didn't care. Why would she? Gareth had power. I had a complaint. In her world, power always won. I walked out of that office realizing something brutal. No one cares about the truth unless it threatens them personally. If I wanted justice, I'd have to build it myself, and I'd have to do it quietly. I didn't quit. I didn't explode in some dramatic hallway confrontation. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and started printing. Every email, every timeline, every timestamped message between me and Gareth over the past 3 years. I created a new folder on my personal encrypted drive and labeled it Truth. Then I went deeper. I pulled communication logs, meeting notes, draft versions with metadata intact. I documented every instance where I'd sent him updates and he responded with vague approval. I saved voice memos from brainstorming sessions where my ideas became our ideas by the end. I backed up everything twice, once on the cloud, once on a physical drive I kept at home. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was preparation. Because I knew one thing for certain: Gareth Vance didn't steal my work just once. He'd done it before and he'd do it again. And when he did, I'd be ready. Weeks passed. Gareth paraded the $60 million project like a prize trophy. News outlets featured him. The company homepage displayed his face under the headline, "Holter Energy's Visionary Leader Secures Historic Investment." I became invisible again, just another face in the meetings, another name on the email chains. Then one Thursday afternoon, Gareth called me into his office. "Ryan, I need you to make the technical model cleaner before the investor review next month," he said, not looking up from his phone. Translation: do more of my work so I can take more credit. I should have refused, should have walked out. Instead, I smiled. "Sure, Gareth, I'll take care of it." That was the first time I lied to him. And it felt easier than I expected, because deep down I'd already decided He wanted me to refine the model. Fine, I'd refine it. And I'd leave something behind he'd never see coming. Late that night, alone in the office with only the hum of the servers for company, I opened the core data sheet. The model was complex, hundreds of variables tracking energy output, cost projections, grid efficiency. Most people would never look past the surface numbers, but I knew every line, every formula, every connection, and that's where I planted it, a small harmless marker, not sabotage, not fraud. Just a single reference code embedded in the calculation logic, a trackable breadcrumb tied to my original timestamp and user ID. If anyone copied this model, if it surfaced anywhere outside the controlled environment, that marker would trace directly back to me. My fingerprint inside the machine, invisible to Gareth, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for, but permanent, undeniable. I saved the file, locked my computer, and walked out into the cool night air. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to control. The news broke 3 weeks later. Holter Energy's VP secures $60 M in clean energy expansion. Gareth's face filled the homepage again, smiling, confident, untouchable. The CEO posted congratulations across social media. Investors called him a game changer. The company threw a celebration party on the rooftop terrace. String lights, champagne, speeches about innovation and leadership. I stood in the back, forcing a smile, watching Gareth raise his glass. To collaboration, he announced, voice carrying over the crowd. To the team that made this possible, people cheered. A few glanced my way with pity smiles, like I should be grateful to be mentioned in the same breath. My stomach burned. I lifted my glass, nodded politely, and took a sip. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, I was patient. And patience, I was learning, was far more dangerous than rage. A month later, my promotion was delayed. The role I'd been promised, the one I'd earned, was suddenly under review due to restructuring. I got the email on a Friday afternoon. No explanation, no apology, just corporate language that meant nothing and everything. On Monday, Gareth stopped by my desk. He leaned against the partition, arms crossed, looking down at me with that same casual arrogance. "You'll get there, champ," he said, patting my shoulder. "Just keep doing what you're doing." Then he walked away, whistling. That's the moment something inside me went ice cold, not hot anger, not frustration, just cold, crystalline clarity. He wasn't just taking credit. He was erasing me, blocking my future to protect his lie. And suddenly, gathering evidence didn't feel like enough. I needed to understand the full scope of what he'd done. So I started digging deeper, not into his presentation, into his expenses. Late nights became routine. The office emptied by 7. By 8, it was just me, the cleaning crew, and the glow of spreadsheets. I started with Gareth's expense reports, innocent enough. Travel costs, vendor payments, subcontractor fees. Nothing unusual at first, but then I noticed discrepancies, small shifts in budget lines tied to contractors I'd never approved. Payments routed through vendors I didn't recognize. One name kept appearing, Vaxon Consulting. I searched our internal vendor database. Nothing. I checked our approved contractor list. Not there, so I searched public records. Vaxon Consulting was a shell company, registered in Delaware. No website, no employees, and the listed owner, Marcus Bellamy, Gareth's brother-in-law. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just credit theft. This was something bigger, darker, and suddenly I wasn't just protecting my work. I was uncovering fraud. I didn't confront him. I didn't panic. I compiled everything into a single organized file. Expense logs, vendor records, payment authorizations with Gareth's digital signature. Then I sent him a polite, almost friendly email. "Hey Gareth, I noticed a few inconsistencies in the vendor cost report for the expansion project. Want a review before submission?" I kept it casual, helpful, the kind of message that wouldn't raise alarms. He replied an hour later, "Handle it. I'm presenting to investors next week. Make sure it's clean." Perfect. That single response became evidence. He'd authorized me to review his records. He'd asked me to make sure it's clean. If anything surfaced later, he couldn't claim ignorance. He'd handed me permission to investigate. I printed the email, added it to my encrypted folder, and smiled for the first time in weeks. He thought he was delegating work. He was signing his own confession. The investors arrived on a Tuesday morning. Black cars, tailored suits, the kind of people who spoke in millions like I spoke in hundreds. Gareth was electric, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, guiding them through the facility like a talk show host. I stood by the screens in the presentation room, silent, watching him walk them through the data. My data, my models, my projections. And there, buried in the proprietary dashboard he loved showing off, was my marker. The invisible code I'd embedded months ago. It flickered briefly during a calculation refresh, just a reference line in the backend logic. No one noticed, no one except me. I recorded everything on my phone, angled discreetly from my pocket, every claim he made, every number he presented as his own. By the time the investors left, smiling and impressed, I had 40 minutes of footage, and I had proof that the model he claimed to have built was unmistakably mine. After the presentation, I stepped outside for air. The parking lot was quiet. That's when a man in a gray suit approached, tall 50s with the calm authority of someone who'd seen everything twice. "Ryan Mercer," he asked. I nodded, cautious. "I'm Keith Brennan, senior analyst with Cordova Investment Group. One of the firms Gareth had just pitched." My pulse quickened. "You built this model, didn't you?" he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I hesitated. He nodded slowly, understanding my silence. "Thought so. You might want to look into how he's moving funds offshore." Then he handed me a business card, turned and Walked away, I stood there staring at the card. Offshore, I hadn't even dug that deep yet, but Keith Brennan had, and now he just handed me the next thread to pull. I started mapping Gareth's financial network that night. Vendor payments, contractor agreements, wire transfer authorizations. I traced every dollar tied to the $60 million project. And the deeper I went, the uglier it became. Gareth wasn't just a credit thief. He was funneling investor money through Vaxin Consulting, his brother-in-law's shell company. From there, funds moved offshore to accounts in the Cayman Islands. It wasn't millions yet, just enough to stay under audit thresholds, but it was systematic, deliberate, and illegal. I documented every transaction, every routing number, every digital signature. By 3 in the morning, I had a folder that could destroy him, but I didn't send it, not yet. Because if I exposed him now, he'd claim ignorance, blame a contractor, throw someone else under the bus. I needed him confident, comfortable. I needed him to keep going until the evidence was so overwhelming that no lawyer could save him. I sent one anonymous report to Holter's internal audit committee, not an accusation. Just a polite observation, possible irregularities in the renewable expansion project budget. Recommend review of vendor payments and offshore wire transfers. I routed it through an encrypted email service untraceable, then I waited. A week later, whispers started circulating through the office. Audit review, data inconsistencies. People spoke in hushed tones near the coffee machine. Gareth started sweating through meetings. His confidence cracked. He snapped at assistants, checked his phone obsessively, started calling Marcus Bellamy, his brother-in-law, multiple times a day. I watched it all from my desk, silent and invisible as always. The foundation was crumbling, and he had no idea I was the one pulling the supports. Not yet, but soon he'd understand, and by then it would be far too late. Gareth called me into his office 2 weeks later. The door clicked shut behind me. He stood by the window staring out at the parking lot, hands in his pockets. "Did you send something?" he asked without turning around. His voice was tight, controlled. I met his reflection in the glass. "Send what?" He turned, studying my face. "An audit report. Someone flagged irregularities in the expansion project." I kept my expression neutral. "You think I'd risk my job over gossip?" He stared at me for a long moment. Doubt flickered in his eyes. He wanted to believe I was harmless, that I was still the loyal, invisible worker who'd let him steal without consequence. Finally, he exhaled. "Just be careful what you say around here." "People are watching?" I nodded. "I always am." He dismissed me with a wave, but as I walked out, I saw it. The seed of paranoia had been planted. He wasn't sure anymore, and uncertainty was the crack I needed. The auditors arrived quietly. No announcement, no warning, just 3 serious-looking people with laptops and federal badges. They set up in a conference room and started requesting files, expense reports, vendor contracts, wire transfer logs. Gareth grew erratic, his usual charm evaporated. He started throwing people under the bus in emails, trying to create distance. That was Ryan's spreadsheet. Ryan handled the vendor approvals. Check with Ryan on the payment authorizations. I watched the emails appear in my inbox one after another, each one attempting to shift blame onto me. But every file I'd prepared had one thing in common: clear authorization signatures. His digital timestamps, his approval workflows, I'd been meticulous, not because I'd planned this moment, but because I'd always done my job correctly. And now that diligence was a shield. He'd tried to bury me under his fraud. Instead, he'd buried himself. He cornered me in the parking lot one evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. "You're finished if this touches me," he hissed, stepping close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with sweat. I looked at him calmly, no fear, no anger, just cold certainty. "Then you better hope it doesn't," I said. His eyes faltered. For the first time, I saw something I'd never seen before: doubt, real, genuine doubt. He'd spent months believing I was too weak, too loyal, too invisible to fight back. Now he wasn't sure, and that uncertainty was eating him alive. He opened his mouth to say something else, then stopped, turned, walked to his car. I stood there watching him drive away, hands steady, heart calm. He'd threatened me, but threats only work if the other person is afraid, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I was patient, and I was winning. The audit report leaked 2 weeks later, not officially. Just whispers that turned into murmurs that turned into headlines. Holter Energy investigating financial irregularities in $60 project. The $60 million fund was frozen pending review. Investors started making calls. Lawyers got involved. And then a journalist contacted me. Anonymous message through LinkedIn. Someone from Cordova Investment leaked Gareth Vance's offshore accounts. Any comment? I stared at the message. Keith Brennan. The analyst who'd warned me in the parking lot. He'd kept digging. And now he'd gone public. I typed back, no comment. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence was speaking for itself. By Friday, the story was everywhere. Financial news, industry blogs, internal company emails. Gareth's face, once celebrated, was now synonymous with scandal. And I'd never sent a single accusatory email. I just let the truth do what truth does when you stop hiding it. Gareth was suspended pending investigation. The announcement came through an official company-wide email. Cold, clinical. Gareth Vance has been temporarily relieved of duties while we conduct a thorough internal review. No defense, no explanation, just the corporate equivalent of exile. I watched him walk past my desk that afternoon. Silent, pale, shaking. Man who'd once stolen my applause now couldn't meet anyone's eyes. People turned away as he passed, conversations stopping mid-sentence. He collected a few items from his office, a photo frame, a jacket, and left through the side entrance. No goodbye speeches, no farewell party, just gone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt nothing because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and truth doesn't need emotion to work. It just needs to be visible. Weeks later, I was summoned to the same boardroom where this all began. Same projector, same long table, same executives, but everything was different. My name was on the proposal displayed behind me. My title, project director, appeared beneath it. The CEO stood at the head of the table, hands folded. "Ryan, we owe you an apology," he said. The words hung in the air. Several executives nodded. One woman looked genuinely ashamed. "Your work on the renewable expansion project was exceptional," the CEO continued, "and we failed to recognize it properly." I breathed for the first time in months, not because they apologized, but because they finally saw me. Not as support, not as background, as the architect. I nodded slowly. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it, not for the recognition, but for the confirmation that patience had been the right choice. Gareth resigned 3 weeks later. The official statement read, "For personal reasons, Gareth Vance has decided to step down from his position at Holter Energy." Everyone knew what that meant. The investigation had found enough. The offshore accounts, the shell company, the embezzlement. His name became shorthand in the office for arrogance and fraud. People whispered it as a warning, "Don't pull a Gareth." The irony wasn't lost on me. The project he'd stolen, my $60 million expansion plan, became mine officially. My promotion was confirmed. My salary doubled. My office moved to the executive floor. But the best part wasn't the success. It was watching the truth dismantle a lie so completely that even the liars couldn't deny it anymore. Gareth thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. I found out later what had triggered the collapse. That small marker I'd embedded in the data, the invisible code tied to my user ID and timestamp, had been traced by the auditors. They'd followed it from Gareth's copied model back to my original files. That single breadcrumb proved ownership beyond any doubt. The proprietary dashboard he claimed to build, mine. The projections he'd presented to investors, mine. The entire foundation of his $60 million empire. Built on work he'd stolen from me, that one string I'd planted months ago had unraveled everything. Not through sabotage, not through drama, just through evidence. Cold, undeniable, time-stamped evidence. And that's the thing about truth, it doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be documented, because eventually someone will pull the thread, and when they do, the whole lie falls apart. I walked out of the Holter Energy building for the last time as project director on a Friday afternoon. The same hallway where I'd once swallowed my anger now felt different. Lighter. The security guard nodded as I passed. A few colleagues waved. I didn't look back. Outside, the air was cool, the sky clear. I thought about Gareth, wherever he was now, probably hearing lawyers, probably blaming everyone but himself. I didn't hate him. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I just understood something he never would. You can steal someone's work, but you can't steal their mind. You can take credit, but you can't fake competence. And eventually the gap between what you claim and what you can deliver becomes visible to everyone. He thought he was pulling me down, but all he did was hand me the thread that would undo him. And I pulled it slowly, carefully, until there was nothing left but truth.